What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Discovering Bob Dylan podcast here on Taste Like Music. I'm joined as always by Dylan Seavey. Today we're talking Infidels, Bob Dylan's 22nd album. Where's the time gone? But first in 2 years, a lifetime for Mr. Dylan, it seems, between records. Couple things happened in those 2 years. Most notably, I would say, Bob Dylan no longer a fundamentalist Christian. That phase of his career, his life, whatever he was thinking, kind of just left. I couldn't even find the backstory on like why, how, like what changed. It was just like, hey, shot of love. Hey, now I'm secular, infidels. Those 2 years, another mystery for Dylan. So Christian trilogy over, thank God. Dylan's back to secular music for the most part. Still a lot of religious imagery on Infidels, but we'll fully delve into that later. Dylan, how are you? How are you feeling about this episode, this album, all that stuff?
I'm doing well. Got a fresh new haircut just for this show. Got complaints that I was doing too much of this in the last episode, so had to look good for everybody. Had to look good for Bob. I'm feeling mostly good about this episode, this album. Man, so many thoughts about this one. But getting into the nitty-gritty of it, yeah, it's difficult to say that he completely abandons at least, the religious imagery, which we still see on this record, but he takes a trip. He was born into a Jewish family, and I know sometime between Shot of Love and this record, he travels to Jerusalem, the homeland. I actually believe one of the photos on it's either the inside cover or the back cover of the vinyl is him in Jerusalem, taken by his ex-wife Sarah. So they're on good enough terms where she's going to Jerusalem and taking photos of him with him. And then coming off a Shot of Love from a musical perspective, where he's toying around with different producers and different studios. He's a bit more focused here on Infidels. Mark Knopfler is firmly entrenched as the guy. They're at the power station in New York. And then, after falling a bit out of critical favor in recent years, it definitely seems like there's an emphasis on a cohesive sound on this record, a slicker production. And after some hints of it on Shot of Love, we have finally firmly entered the 80s here. And for all intents and purposes, it worked. This was hailed as a bit of a comeback. I'm sure that you've got some notes on the critical reception.
Yes, the critics definitely liked this one more than Shot of Love. They pretty much had abandoned Dylan at that point. You get a lot of 4 stars, a lot of B plus, A minus kind of territory for this one across the board. 4.5 stars from Rolling Stone. So they're fully back in Bob's corner. And it did pretty well on the charts as well. I think it was top 10 in the UK, top 20 in the US, went gold. So a bit of a resurgence for Bob. And I think teaming up with Mark Knopfler was a good move for sure to kind of get the word out that hey, I'm cool again, man. Got Knopfler here.
And look at that album cover. He is cool.
That I gotta say, we haven't talked about album covers in a while, but that is a good looking picture. Love the beard on him right there.
Oh my God, the
Nice pair of
Sunnies,
sunglasses. Yeah, just everything works. Everything works on that one.
top notch album cover. Did you break out your actual vinyl record to listen to this one?
I did, which is always a treat to be able to listen to Bob in full vinyl. This is the first time I've been able to do that actually. Not the
Lovely.
last. Once again, follow up with Empire Burlesque because I got that
Mhm.
on vinyl, baby. I know what my mom was thinking in 1985, but big year for buying records for her, I guess.
Well, Infidels was such a good, critically lauded record. I mean, you got to get the follow up, right? And especially when he looks so cool on the Empire Burlesque cover too.
Yeah, that's
Ooh.
well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. There's gonna be a lot to talk about for the next episode. Some additional notes about this one. You mentioned Mark Knopfler producing, also playing guitar,
Mhm,
joined by Mick Taylor, formerly the Rolling Stones, excellent slide guitarist. Sly and Robbie on
mhm.
drums and bass, respectively. So he's embracing the islands, the reggae feel that worked so well on Dead Man. Um, a little bit better on this one with Sly and Robbie. Benmont Tench on keys. A funny little aside from Knopfler, who first was just going to produce. And he says, I suggested Billy Gibbons, but I don't think Bob had ever heard of ZZ Top. So apparently, Bob, I mean, maybe that's insider knowledge, Knopfler talking music with Bob, you know, but not knowing ZZ Top. I do wonder, like, how hooked in the scene Bob was around the time because he sometimes seems like a space cadet where it's just like his own world is the only thing that matters. So I thought that was funny.
That doesn't do wonders for the image I often have in my head of him cruising around town with the top down, listening to Tush at full volume.
Yeah.
Um, but guy can still dream.
Yeah. Knopfler also said it was difficult working and recording Bob. He said, I think Bob is much more disciplined as a writer of lyrics, as a poet. He's an absolute genius. As a singer, absolute genius. But musically, I think it's a lot more basic. The music just tends to be a vehicle for that poetry, which succinctly explained why I never got into Bob Dylan in the past. That was always my complaint. I like Dylan now, so I got over that hang up. There's plenty of music in there. It's not just words and singing. So
A
um
hell of a review.
and interestingly enough, he also approached before hiring Mark Knopfler, uh three people that would be just a trip to be on the boards. David Bowie, Elvis Costello, and Frank Zappa. And I gotta say, it's a little bit of a missed opportunity. A Frank Zappa and Bob Dylan record would just be, I can't even imagine what that would sound like. That would be out of control.
Even if it was an abject disaster, it would be the most fascinating abject disaster to ever exist. The hyper musical Zappa with with Bob. Woo.
What could have been, what could have been, especially in like the 80s, like my Lord,
No.
I don't even know. That would be something. But what we get is Mark Knopfler, who was in vogue, Dire Straits, very much a hip outfit. This was before Brothers in Arms, but after Love for Gold and making movies. So uh,
Hmm.
he's a big time guy. Worked with Dylan, Sledge and Cumming, of course, but this is a little more in depth working together here. So I don't know. Other than that, there's not a lot of lore around it. You think there would be more, considering what happened in the 2 years between albums, but it just kind of seemed like Dylan was like, "Hey, I'm ready to make music again. I'm ready to be secular again. Let's just do it. Let's go."
Well, somewhat similarly to the last record, the real lore of this record, Infidels is generally a very well thought of, respected record amongst Dylan fans. And the two conversations that surround it are, how and what it did for him coming out of the Christian trilogy, and like we talked about last episode, the record that could have been. That is the real lore, even more so than what we talked about last episode with Shot of Love. But we can get into that in a second. I have a lot of thought. Do you want me to start this, or do you want to start this off?
I think I should start this one first because
Okay.
I have some thoughts as well. So
Okay.
I kind of want to hear your rebuttal
Okay.
to my review. All right. So the first thing you notice when you turn this bad boy on, man, the 80s have come and it's in full force here. There's just, more reverb on everything. Dylan's voice, the drums, everything, the bass screams 1980s. It's an interesting sound because you have Mark Knopfler's guitar, and that sort of has this timeless, shine to it. It really just cuts through anything you throw at it. It cuts through the 80s. It would cut through anything. It would cut through, rap, emo, 50s. It's its own thing. So you have this shining light of Mark Knopfler's guitar cutting through the murky, plastic sounding music. And this is where Bob has lost me. I hate to say it. It's not, I don't know if it's my least favorite Bob Dylan album, but it's right there at the bottom. And I don't know what I'm missing exactly. I mean, lyrically, I think it's very solid. I like Dylan's singing. I think he's exploring his range nicely. I think there's some nice melodies in it. But Bob Dylan paired with this just overwhelmingly 1980s production has just it's ended my love affair pretty hard. Even with the songs you sent me in your special playlist, I don't think we're getting to 3.5 even with that. And this is kind of what a lot of the 60s and 70s artists went through. And I think a lot of it has to do with, I love the 80s. I love 80s production. What I don't like in the 1980s that much is folk, blues, and sort of like mainstream, sort of like adult contemporary rock and roll, which this seems like to me. The good stuff in the 80s was metal and pop and R&B and pub rock and stuff that more successfully like contained the sounds of the 1980s. A lot of the bass and the guitar outside Knopfler and just like the whole stew of the sound just doesn't work for me. I've never loved it. I don't even, particularly care for Brothers in Arms that much. Like that whole just rock sound in the 80s just kind of loses me, the mainstream stuff. So it's tough. I mean, I do like Joker Man. I think it's a very solid song. I like, it's got the bass is great. Love the bass line. The tone, not crazy about. The harmonica is decent. I like Dylan's voice here. I like what he's doing with his voice. He's exploring the limits and different melodies and stuff. Got a little reggae-ish beat, but I think it's kind of downhill from there. Sweetheart Like You is pretty. So a lot of people said it was sexist. I don't know. Probably not. Probably Bob didn't, mean for it to come off that way, but some critics said it's sexist, some of the lyrics, stuff about staying at home or whatever. But it's a fine song. I'm not really going to get into that. Neighborhood Bully, that's a big full-throated defense of Israel there. But musically, kind of like a weak Rolling Stones in the 80s track. I think the digital production, and this was recorded completely digital, everything recorded and engineered, and it just really sounds like it. And this is, I think I read it was like one of the first ones to be like completely digital recorded on a certain, Sony workstation or whatever. And man, does it just feels like not plastic, but like it feels unanalog to such a degree that it just takes the shine out of everything for me. License to Kill, I'm a little confused about the anti-space program lyrics. The man thinks because he rules the earth, he can do with it as he please. And if things don't change soon, he will. Oh, man has invented his doom. First step was touching the moon. I didn't know that Bob was such a Luddite, but apparently not down with man going to the moon. I think the music's a little soporific. I like the organ work, but I don't know. It just feels very sort of like middle of the road with bad digital production. I, you get a little reggae, Union Sundown. Probably the best like rocker. That main slide riff is pretty kick-ass. I like the lyrics, the screed against capitalism, globalization, politicians, all that good stuff. Got a good blues, maybe a little country stomp to it. Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight. Maybe the second best track on here. It sounds like Bob Marley meets Dire Straits, which is exactly what it should sound like with Mark Knopfler and Sly and Robbie. Kind of the same melody as No Woman, No Cry a little bit as well. And it's pretty good. It's pretty, but basically, none of this feels special to me. None of it feels like very necessary. There's some, societal issue songs and some, sort of protest songs that aren't, 60s protest songs. These are kind of new age protest songs. It's just much harder for this type of music to sound good in the 80s. Like he could have sleptwalked through this, like exactly the same music, like the same charts of everything. And if he had done it in the 70s with like really good 70s production, I think it would be solid because it kind of reminds me a little bit of, like Street Legal and Slow Train Coming, but it just feels weaker across the board on every level, the sound, everything. And it might just be the reverb that just takes that edge off everything and kind of brings all the instruments into like kind of a mushy center. So I don't know. It's very like I'm trying to think of like the folk rock albums and artists in the 80s that I think did a good job of transitioning, and there's none. Like there's probably not a single one that I can think of that I'm like, yeah, they really took the 80s by the horns and made it into their own, sound. I mean, even people I love like Richard Thompson kind of fell into the same trap, Elvis Costello. Um, like nobody escaped the 80s alive. And this is for me where the 80s just takes over.
But the one bad record that Costello made in the 80s is the one that you defend, which is
Oh yeah.
Goodbye Cruel World.
I defend him because I love Elvis Costello and I think he still writes good songs. Like the production is just abysmal. For Costello, I mean, everything he ever did I love, but like that's the one where the production really takes it down. Like there's not an Elvis Costello album among his first 10 that isn't in my top five of the year, basically, except for that one because the production blows.
You don't have you wouldn't consider King of America to be a good 80s folk record?
Well, no, he kind of okay. You're right. Elvis Costello was able to take it after the 80s got him. He kind of struck
Sure.
back and kind of reverted and reversed course and was able to, I think, successfully. But he really stripped everything down and like took away
Yeah.
as much of the 80s as possible, which
Yeah.
Dylan doesn't do here. He embraces the 80s. And I blame Mark Knopfler more than Dylan because I just don't think Knopfler has a great 80s sound. Like his guitar sounds good everywhere, no matter what. But the rest of his production, like Brothers in Arms, I do not care for that much because it has like this really wimpy, like, soggy 80s production to it. So there's only so much that a weapon like Knopfler's guitar and Bob Dylan's vocals and lyrics can overcome in the 80s. And I'm not saying this is a bad album. I just did not find anything other than Joker Man to be like, kind of sit up straight and listen, uh, except for one of the cuts that was left off the album, which we can talk about whenever. But as a whole, like this is a 3-star album for me, and it's below Shot of Love. It's probably like right around Self Portrait and the Bob Dylan Columbia's Revenge album.
I know better than to defend Swordfish Trombones and Rain Dogs on a podcast with you, so I'm not going to do that. But I will I will pose those records, especially given that the latter is maybe the best record of the 80s. But oh man, you fried my brain. I don't know where to start. In a weird way, I feel like I can't disagree with you that much, because if I were to ever choose for any album, let alone this album, to sound any way, I would never want it to sound like this. I The 80s, like everything that you're talking about, I don't necessarily disagree with. In fact, I think it applies to some of those genres. Like, I think it applies to the pop music too. I mean, there's so much pop music from the 80s that everyone's like, listen to how funky this is. I'm like, this isn't funky at all. Listen to Sly and the Family Stone. Listen to listen to James Brown, listen to real funk music, and none of the funky stuff from the 80s sounds funky at all. It's all plastic and quantized and terrible. But again, I know better than to try to have that conversation with you. Um, but so I don't necessarily disagree with that. It's funny because I do like Brothers in Arms. A lot of stuff that I like from the 80s, I generally like in spite of the 80s. I mean, it took me a long time to come around to Born in the USA as a whole. There are always songs off of it that I liked, and I think it's a really strong album. But even that, it's like I love that in spite of it. The stuff that I love on this record, I love in spite of it. And to man, if this is how you feel about Infidels, my God, I'm even more excited for the albums that we have coming up after this, because that might be another reason why I think generally positively about this record is I probably unknowingly compare it. Like, I think this album to me sounds better than Shot of Love. I mean, there's elements of Shot of Love, probably the more organic elements of it that I prefer to this, but as a whole, I don't know, like, I guess this is muddy, but it almost seems like an intentional 80s muddy. Like, yeah, this is how the bass and the drums are supposed to sound. Whereas Shot of Love, it sounds like they were just, I don't know, doing way too much cocaine during the mixing process, which might surprise you because no one did cocaine in the 1980s. Definitely not Bob Dylan. So I don't know. It's funny. I didn't even really make any notes on the production on this record because it's almost something that maybe I don't even want to think about, because yeah, if I thought about it, it would make me think. This for me is, as it constitutes, is like a 3.5 star record, which for me is like, yeah, it's good. I like it. Oh man, I disagree so much with so much of what you just said. As it's officially constructed, this is an album of fourths for me. Of the 8 songs that make up the final product, I think that 2 are masterpieces. I think 2 are very good. I think 2 are fine. And 2 I have very little use for. So I'll work my way backwards so we can progressively get more positive. I am not in agreement with you on Union Sundown. I think a lot like Trouble on the last album. I think it's lame. I think it's limp. Uh, Heavy-handed set of lyrics, that I don't necessarily disagree with, but I think he approached this topic better on North Country Blues, Oftentimes They Are Changing, and he absolutely nails it, in my opinion, on a song coming up on a later record. But this one, I don't think it's kick it. The bow, 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 bow. Like, it to me, that's where the production, the guitar tone, and Mick Taylor's a great guitarist. I I think it's really lame. Um, and then yeah, there's Neighborhood Bully, which I I I would like if it had a different set of lyrics. I kind of like the lean Stonesy rock and roll edge, but yeah, I can't get past the Zionist aspect of it. I would like to believe that Bob is able to currently balance, well deserved Jewish pride with a better understanding of the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. Who knows what was in his head at this time? He was coming out of the Christian years, rediscovering his roots, and I it's unfortunately apparently too easy for a lot of people to conflate, Judaism and the concept of anti-Semitism with support for the Israeli government, whatever it is, these lyrics are what they are. I can't pretend it doesn't affect my personal opinion of it. So I don't really listen to it. And I pray for a ceasefire and peace in the Middle East in lieu of listening to Neighborhood Bully. Past those two songs, I think that Don't Fall Apart on Me Tonight is a decent closer, good harmonica performance, just not top tier Bob for me. I think it's a cool song with some interesting lyrics, but there's a kick-ass live version on the Real Live album that I prefer. So those are the two fine ones for me. Then the two that I really like, Man of Peace, which has, I think that's the much more convincing blues rocker. Really great slide guitar work from Mick Taylor, great rock and roll energy overall. And hell, with those lyrics, that could have been on Shot of Love or Slow Train. Again, it's funny, like, oh, this is Bob's secular album, but you got a song like Man of Peace, which, it's just funny how people view it all. And then Sweetheart Like You, which features some of my favorite playing of Knopfler's on the album, and I think a really fascinating set of lyrics. I read an interpretation of it one time that described it as Dylan using a cheesy pickup line as a springboard for all of his opinions on culture and society, which is brilliant. And yeah, the woman like you should be at home line, undoubtedly hasn't aged very well. I think when you look at it in the context of the verse, it seems like he's trying to come from a good place, because immediately following it, it's how much abuse will you be? Yeah, the line is something along the lines of like, a woman like you should be at home, looking after someone who really loves her. But then how much abuse will you be able to take? There's no way to tell by that first kiss, you know, a sweetheart like you doing in a dump like this, attempting to look out for her. I mean, in my opinion, it still kind of comes from a place of sexism, regardless of what the intentions are. But I don't think the intentions are necessarily bad. I can't speak to what they are, but whatever it is, I don't think it undermines the rest of the song. They say that patriotism is the last refuge to which a scoundrel clings. Steal a little and they throw you in jail. Steal a lot and they'll make you king. I always like that one. And then two masterpieces in my mind. Joker Man, the obvious one, more sublime guitar work. I think the performance from Sly and Robbie is killer. It's such a lyrically compelling song. Who is the Joker Man? Is it Bob himself? Is it Ronald Reagan, which is a theory that I just learned about for the first time the other day? Is it even just one person at all? I think it's one of the most incredible sets of lyrics that he's ever penned, full of religious and political imagery. I think you can put it up against any of his greatest 60s works. The rifleman stalking the sick and the lame. Preacher man seeks the same. Who will get there first is uncertain. Nightsticks and water cannons, tear gas, padlocks, Molotov cocktails, and rocks behind every curtain. False hearted judges dying in the webs that they spin. Only a matter of time till night comes stepping in. And topping it off, like incredible melody, super passionate vocal performance. I mean, like this is another one for me where even if it's ultimately not my favorite voice, he has so many vocals that just transcend it. And people who don't think he could write a good melody or that all his best melodies were stolen, it's like, listen to Joker Man. The way he hits that chorus every time. And I think I think License to Kill in particular deserves more praise than it normally gets. I think it's a really sensitive, important commentary on the greed and corruption of powerful figures, addressing the dangers of these figures while leaving room for empathy towards the people they indoctrinate. If you look at the world around us today and consider that third verse, now he's hell bent for destruction. He's afraid and confused, and his brain has been mismanaged with great skill. And all he believes are his eyes, and his eyes, they just tell him lies. Like, you look at how so many of these major, media outlets, have fed people certain types of slanted information and everything like that. I think it's another in a long line of tunes that's only grown more prescient with age. And the landing on the moon, like I get that it sounds funny, man has invented his doom. First step was touching the moon, but like look at someone like Elon Musk, who just a few years ago was like, "Oh, well, we're going to start a new colony on another planet." It's like you and so many other people have all the money in the world to try to fix this planet we're on, but instead you're thinking about going to this other planet instead of trying to fix what we have right here. So I don't necessarily view it as like anti-space travel, more so again like the greed of man, or the way that man chooses to wield his power. I love it. There's a great cover by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers at the Bob Dylan 30th anniversary concert, and I am as obsessed with Petty as I am with Dylan and the Beatles. So that's definitely one to check out. But again, another great melody there. I really love it. So as a whole, it's kind of a perplexing album for me, and it's kind of insane that a record with only 8 songs kind of takes me through all these peaks and valleys. But I don't know. I'm surprised to hear you feel that way. I thought that you would just not feel that strongly, just because I know how you feel about a lot of 80s music. I didn't think that it would get to you that much.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a terrible album or anything, but just the way that it sounds with Bob Dylan just struck a particular nerve, I guess, listening to it, where I just was like, this is not working for me. And I feel like I knew that somehow. Maybe I had heard this album before or listened to a couple more songs. Knopfler production should be something, you wouldn't think it would be such a, of all the producers he's had, it's Mark Knopfler that finally sets me off, which, you wouldn't expect that.
Yeah.
But yeah, the 80s-ness of it just does not work. The lyrics are fine. I think everything is fine, but I would much rather listen to any of the Christian trilogy. And it's not like I scored them like, way higher or anything. It's just they had a particular thing, I think, that they all did well in different aspects. And this one just feels like you take away the lyrics and it just feels like anyone could have done this. And maybe that's all
I
Bob
think,
Dylan albums, but
well, no, I disagree with that last statement, but I think the one before it, I can understand that. Yeah, I don't hear anything in this album musically where I'm like, oh, well, that's uniquely Dylan. It's not something like Desire, which sounds like nothing else, or the Electric Trilogy, which is from another planet. So I get that. We have an album here. And we feel differently on a lot of these songs. I'm still kind of grasping all my thoughts on everything you just said. We could be talking about a very different record here. According to what you just said, one that wouldn't change your opinion that much. It would change my opinion quite a bit. Yeah, there's so many numbers here, a lot of which initially came out on bootleg series 1 through 3, less than 10 years after this. And I think it was kind of the first moment that a lot of fans recognized what they didn't know they were missing out on. Yeah, Someone's Got a Hold of My Heart, which I think is an awesome upbeat pop number, kind of a similar chord progression to If Not For You. He rewrites this one as Tight Connection to My Heart, which shows up on Empire Burlesque. So we'll talk about that soon enough. But I love this song in particular. He had a great story song in Too Late, again, which I think is kind of reminiscent of some of his 60s lyrics and more stripped down, and some other stuff from these sessions. That eventually morphs into Foot of Pride, kind of a more bluesy tune that I like. Death Is Not the End, which eventually is given a couple of overdubs, released 5 years later on Down in the Groove. So you've officially heard one of the songs from one of Dylan's most maligned records. But the two completely unacceptable omissions, in my opinion, the two that make me question Bob's sanity in this decade, are Lord Protect My Child and Blind Willie McTell, both of which feature him on piano. We love our piano, Bob. And these killer gospel vocals and melodies. I'm actually kind of partial to Lord Protect My Child, just because I love the feel of it. I love Bob's vocals so much on it. But Blind Willie McTell is like as much a masterpiece to me as Joker Man or License to Kill. He does more of this on later records, where he uses a historical figure or event as a means to weave a greater tapestry of a story. And in the span of four verses, with again killer piano playing, awesome acoustic guitar from Knopfler, he makes you feel like you're in the South during the time of slavery. It is so eerie and unsettling, and it's such a brilliant touch to use Blind Willie McTell as the central figure, given the roots of the American blues. It's amazing. I cannot believe these two songs didn't make the record. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I echo your sentiment on those. The other ones that you sent me, Too Late and Hold of My Heart, they were okay. Too Late definitely felt like 60s Bob, very repetitive. So I was kind of like, meh, meh. Death's Not the End. Okay, I like the stripped down performance. I think it would have added something at least different to the album, which another criticism probably of the album is there's not any variety at all. Like there's nothing out of the ordinary. There's no big ballad. There's no like closing track where it's just solo Bob. There's very little like lead piano parts. So couple couple things that would have fixed would have been Blind Willie McTell, which yes, total masterpiece. It doesn't fit the album at all, so perhaps that is why it's was left off. Like it sounds completely out of place, like from a different decade. Everything about it, it's maybe his prettiest melody he ever wrote. It is such a good, effective melody. It's almost hard to believe it's Bob Dylan, but that may be why it's not on the album because it just,
It's
does
too
not
good.
exactly. And then Lord Protect My Child, great piano, strong Dylan vocal performance. Another one that would have definitely improved the album, but does not fit at all on the album as far as like the sound of it goes. Maybe if you put like both of those on there and then you also add Death Is Not the End, it's now a completely different album, and maybe those things would have fit together better. But the Infidels that Bob gave us has, a very similar sound, and perhaps that was on purpose, trying to get a very like, thematically and musically non-diverse album. So yeah, those songs definitely would have improved it though. Blind Millie McTell especially to me is just best song on the album if it was on there for sure.
You are going to gain a lot of brownie points from the Dylan fans watching.
After I squandered all of my built-up goodwill with 3 stars and the
I
poor review, I'm bringing it all back with Blind Willie McTell.
No, I think as long as you like Joker Man and Blind Willie McTell, you could probably say just about anything else, and they'll let you off the hook because I think those are commonly accepted as the best song that made the album and the best song that didn't. But yeah, talking to a friend of ours the other day, he was mentioning, he was alive when the bootleg series 1 through 3 came out in '91, and had been a fan for years, had seen Dylan live and everything. And he was just saying that hearing Blind Willie McTell for the first time, yeah, it was this conflicting feeling of elation. You're hearing one of your musical heroes, like, oh my God, they did it again. They wrote this incredible song. This is up there with the best stuff they ever did. Followed by the immediate, and what the fuck? Why? Like listening to, the Highway 61 outtakes and something like Desolation Road didn't make the record. And then you hear it and you think, what the hell, dude? Like, and granted, Highway 61 is, spoiler, a better album than Infidels. But that similar thing, it's like how he never messed that up to this point. Like there's no like obvious. unimpeachable masterpiece that didn't make her. There's some great song, Abandoned Love from the Desire session, but there's also like, in my opinion, there's not truly a dog on Desire. I don't love Joey, but I think Joey is still totally fine and good and enjoyable. And maybe Mozambique or Romance in Durango are lesser, but this is the first one where it's like, this is top two song on the record. I mean, I kind of feel that way with Shot of Love and You Changed My Life and Groom Still Waiting at the Altar, but at least they corrected one of those. This is just, it's insanity. It's so good. But he started after that bootleg series was announced. He started playing it in concert, and it's gone in and out of his set list over the years. So he recognizes that it's a great song, thankfully. And yeah, I don't know. It doesn't fit, but like, I don't know. Did Desolation Row fit on Highway 61 being the one acoustic song? I mean, Blood on the Tracks is half electric, half acoustic. I don't know. Like, I value diversity. It's why I love those first two band albums because they're all over the place. The Zeppelin albums, man. I mean, you go from Black Dog and rock and roll right to Battle of Evermore. And I get that it's maybe more so a production thing than a fast or slow type thing, but I think they could have made it work. And you see it work slash happen on the next record where one song is way different than all the others. You will soon find out what that is on 1985's Empire Burlesque. I don't think you'll need to text me for any clarification. I think the one very different song will stand out to you immediately. I know you own it, but have you ever actually listened to it?
No, I've never listened to it. I hold the opinion that 1985, perhaps the worst year in music up till, somewhere in the 2000s.
Even with Rain Dogs?
Yeah, even with Rain Dogs, which I also own, by the way, and have never listened to
That's
outside
smart.
of the Tom Waits week. But no, 1985 is terrible. I've never listened to Empire Burlesque. I would have avoided it successfully for my entire life if not for this series. So a lot to look forward to. I'm hoping to get a sub 3 star Dylan review out there. I think it's time, and I think I've earned it. So I'm looking forward to this one.
Well, knowing how you feel about this record, I don't know. I could actually see it going one of two ways. I could see it going way further downhill where you're like, oh my God, this is a disaster. Or I could see you almost thinking like, you know what, this is so, if you think Infidel sounds like an 80s album, it's about to sound like fucking Rumors when you listen to Empire Burlesque. And maybe that sort of maximalist aspect of it is gonna like turn it back around for you where you respect or like it more. I don't really know. The one thing I'll tell you to keep in mind is just remember that Bob was going through some stuff. He he was really going through it. I believe he got married in 1985 for the second time, which nobody knew at the time. It's either 85 or 86, but it's around this general time. I haven't watched it yet, but I know a little bit. There's the new documentary about the making of We Are the World, and yeah, everyone always has fun online using the gifs of Dylan sitting there looking like that, and it's objectively funny how bored and annoyed he looks, but also he is surrounded by Michael Jackson, who's king of the music world, Stevie Wonder, who I don't know when Stevie's last big record was, but by that time Stevie had been royalty for so long. I don't think he had released any outright like duds or critical failures. Lionel Richie, who's on top of the world, Madonna, Springsteen, who just unborn in the USA, and here's Bob. Infidels was a somewhat of a critical success, but you hear kind of where he goes with Empire Burlesque, and it's not even he's not even having the critical success or the cultural standing as he did in the 70s, let alone the 60s. And I know that people have talked about, apparently there's a scene where he's literally asking, I don't know if it's Lionel or Steve or someone, they're telling him like, sing like Bob Dylan, and he's like, well, how can you show me how? Like, he's there's a lot happening there, so just keep that in mind.
I'll
Go.
go easy on him.
No,
I'll
no, no,
give
no,
it
no, no,
a
like,
thing.
don't go easy on the album, because I'm not gonna go easy on the album, but just to our boy, go easy on him here, because you hear it. I think you really hear it.
Well, I can't wait. I really can. I'm really excited for this one.
This is, man, I wasn't expecting you to have this reaction to Infidels. Man, I'm at a loss for words. This is gonna be great. It's gonna be fantastic.
I usually am pretty hard on artists as they get older. I do not, pull my punches. They lose me. It happens to everybody. Neil Young, you too. Eventually, it comes for all of us. Time the Destroyer, that is. So we will see. I'm sure he'll get back to some good stuff later on. I do know some of the like 2000 stuff pretty good. So. This is just a little lull. He would come back. We don't have to, mourn for our buddy Dylan here. He'll be all right. He'll get back there. Yeah, I think that's it for Infidels. I don't want to think about it anymore. It's annoying me. Blind Willie McTell, I will add to my what year did that actually come out? I gotta add it to my playlist of best songs of the year.
Well, it was officially released in '91, but it will
Well,
be
I can't put
making
it on
my
91.
no, it'll be making the best of the '80s, Dylan. It's an '80s song.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, that'll be number one, pretty much guaranteed. I can't imagine anything else supplanting that one, but we'll see. We'll get there. We're not even halfway through the 80s yet, but we're done with Infidels. We're looking forward to Empire Burlesque and all the things that come with it. It'll be a good one next episode. What do you think about Infidels? What do you think about my opinion on Infidels? I will get much hate in the comments. I know it. But remember, I do love Blind Willie McTell and Joker Man. So leave your thoughts on Infidels, on my opinion, on Dylan's opinion in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. Check out the description for links to all social media, Patreon, if you want to join the Discord and talk to us on the reg. We're always there. And yeah, listen to Empire Burlesque because we're going to have a fun one in 1985. We'll see you then.